Hello everybody and welcome back to the Drakensberg, and in this video we're going to be photographing waterfalls, which is a good opportunity to use my ND filters and my polarizer, and mention that I am now working with K's filters, who I'm sure won't want me to push their wares too hard, but it's great that companies like that can support photographers like me and this YouTube channel. So thank you, K's, but of course we won't just be using filters, we'll be talking about composition and all of these creative aspects of photography as well. So I hope you'll enjoy the video. Just had to stop off en route at these two tree ferns. A rather lovely scene here in Royal Natal National Park. I can't really get lower without bringing the trees right up into the scene, and I actually quite like them at this scale. Maybe as a portrait frame or a landscape frame, I'll take both and see which works best. And then I'll probably, well, walk a little lower and see if it does work with the larger scale of tree. Yeah, lovely seeing this. There's always an element to which I have to find my feet when I start a trip, so taking photos is a good way to do that. And this tree fern is a great subject for the foreground, but the rest of the foreground is obviously lacking in interest. And the backdrop is great, but it would be nice to have some more dynamic light, but still it's a nice record shot. And I think maybe this portrait frame works a little bit better compositionally, even if I didn't quite manage to get it level. And then I took a step down, and I think the trees here that are slightly larger, maybe compositionally that works a little bit better, although then you start to block some of that amazing valley in the background. So nice images to start with anyway. Elegance personified. This was my first visit to Gudu Falls, so I didn't know quite what to expect, and apparently I should have expected very difficult shooting conditions, certainly not the right conditions to be talking about camera technique and filter use. Because it started raining almost as soon as we arrived, which we could get out of by standing under an overhang, but then gusts of wind were blowing the spray from the waterfall onto our filters and front elements. So in fact I left my polarizer on throughout just to avoid having to clean my lens. And then because it was dark, it was difficult to get short shutter speed images. But in general, I prefer longer exposures. It's just that in this case, that created problems with this tree moving around in the wind, but in particular with that spray. So the longer your exposure, the more of an issue you had with spray. And this photo kind of illustrates the problems that I was having fairly well. That spray really is a bit of a disaster, but also you can see I didn't manage to shoot this photo level. In fact, there were dozens of photos which were 5 to 10 degrees off level. So I guess that's part of that bedding in process, getting back to shooting again after a few weeks off. But I did get a couple of images that I was happy with. I preferred the simplicity of the longer exposures and its effect on the texture in the water. Short shutter speeds can work really well actually with waterfalls, but not in this particular case, or at least not in my opinion, and particularly given that it was so dark. But this portrait frame I think balances really nicely with that arc in the foreground matching the arc from the overhang above. And there was a bit of cloud coming through at the time, which softened the cliff in the background, which I think worked well. Whereas here, this landscape frame, you can see more of that cliff and a lot more of the overhang to this lovely arcing shape on the right hand side of the image that I think does balance fairly well with the trees on the left, which partially obscure the enormous boulder that's blocking some of the pool and actually really restricted our creative opportunities. But anyway, two shots that I was pretty happy with, and a good start to the trip, a brilliant hike on that day. But we're going to pick up the video now the following day on a rather wet hike up towards the amphitheatre and the chain ladders. Hello from the Drakensberg chain ladders. I haven't done too much videoing on the route up from the Sentinel car park because we've been walking in the mist, but it's been lovely and cool, which is a nice contrast to last year when it was baking hot on this route. But the chain ladders are the only really technical section of our route, and so we tend to hand over our bags to the porters to help carry them up here, just to keep it nice and safe and easy. And we're going up here to hopefully find Tugela Falls in flood, or at least with more water in it than I've ever seen before. The paths up here were much wetter than I've known before, so hopefully we'll be able to photograph a really wonderful waterfall, and particularly tomorrow morning when I'm hoping there'll be a sunrise. How is it, Adam?
It was quite exciting, wasn't it? It's good.
Oh, there's more.
Don't look at that bit. The next section is much shorter and much easier. Here we are at the top of Tugela Falls, and as you can see it's a bit misty, so we're not going to hang around here to take photos this evening or this afternoon. We're going to instead carry on to camp, where we'll hopefully get a much better view in the morning. But I've got to say there's a lot of water in this waterfall. It's not a big waterfall, but there's a lot more water in it now than there ever has been when I've been here, and so I know that if we get clear views tomorrow morning, it's going to look really, really fantastic. We're getting ready to head out because it's brightened up a bit. The rain has passed, at least temporarily. We can see Sentinel there, so we're going to head out in that direction and see if we can spot our waterfall. We're at the Tugela Falls viewpoint now, and just as we reached the edge we could see the waterfall, but unfortunately in front of me over here there is nothing but cloud. The cloud has really filled in the ravine that separates us and the waterfall, whereas behind me this looks pretty fantastic. So I'm going to change plans. We're going to do the waterfall tomorrow morning. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a good morning, but for now I think it's better to make use of these amazing conditions that are happening in the opposite direction towards the eastern buttress. So I'm actually going to head up a hill and try and get a bit more of a zigzag of that cliff edge and see how that looks. There's not going to be a way to shoot this without including the tents, but I can always clone them out since they're our own tents. I think this just needs a foreground, because now that we can see the eastern buttress, this really looks quite exciting. This foreground would work nicely as a portrait frame, but you can see that the background is still quite small compared to the foreground. So I was looking for a landscape frame that I could shoot at a longer focal length to enlarge that backdrop. And I ended up here with this nice balance of water and bushes and rocks. But unfortunately, using a longer focal length does mean that I needed to focus bracket, and that created a real technical headache because these grasses in the foreground overlap into the background, and with the wind that creates an insurmountable technical issue trying to get everything sharp. So this isn't technically perfect, but I think it does capture the atmosphere of that first evening of our camp on the cliff edge very well. So I was pretty happy to take this photo, and I do really like the composition as well. So at least I'd produced something at this point that I was happy with. And that evening it started raining, and we headed back to the camp, and we stayed in our group tent and socialized a bit before going to bed with high hopes for the following day.
Good morning, everybody. I can see that I look pretty awful. It was cold last night, so I had fairly broken sleep, but we're here and the weather is looking wonderful. I think we're just about to walk out to the edge of the cliff and see Tugela Falls at its very, very best, so I'm really looking forward to this. It is a gorgeous morning out here on top of the amphitheatre, and Tugela Falls has plenty of water in. So you can see the sky here is a bit devoid of colour, so this is the sort of grey period before sunrise itself, and sunrise is going to be slightly delayed by that cloud bank, but once the sun's up I'm sure we'll get some wonderful golden light and very welcome warmth because it is cold. I've had a little stroll along the edge here looking for rocks and grasses that could make a nice foreground, but I think close to where I started might be my best bet. I quite like this round rock here and these grasses next to it and this diagonal line in the foreground. I'm thinking about forming a portrait frame, obviously with the waterfall, but actually not including the sky, and trying to make the most of that waterfall, so potentially coming a bit further back and getting as high as I can and zooming into that central section that you see in the frame there. My last portrait image didn't work at all. I don't really know what I was thinking. The composition just doesn't work, but I've switched to a few feet to the left, and I think this works a lot better as a square composition. And as you can see, we're just getting the first light now, so I'm going to take the photo.
This certainly works better than that portrait frame, and the longer exposure has made that water nice and silky and given a bit of motion to the grasses as well, which actually I quite like in this case. It's a bit more atmospheric and representative of the morning, but really this is difference for difference's sake. In fact, the straightforward wide scene from exactly the same spot I think works better compositionally and from an interest perspective, with this peak sentinel on the right hand side being quite a major feature in the image as well. And the reason I was trying to avoid this is because I have photographed this scene in the most dramatic and transcendent lighting conditions you can imagine. It's one of the curses, if you can call it that, of visiting these places so many times. So I was trying something different. I think it kind of worked, but honestly, I think I'm trying too hard in this case, and maybe I should have just enjoyed the sunrise. But fortunately, as the sunrise progressed, there was more to shoot.
So I don't know how clear this is in the video, but you can see in this top falls here, there's a bit of red fringing either side of the spray, and that is a rainbow forming in line with the waterfall. So what I need to do now is change my position to get that rainbow to try to align with the bigger falls directly beneath it. Now that I've repositioned myself, you can see that rainbow is going through that main falls, but I think really we want the sun to be a bit higher, because then the more vertical part of the rainbow will be aligned with that waterfall. At the moment the sun is a little bit too low and still a little bit too warm, so you've got more of those red colours coming through and less of the blue-green colours. But hopefully I'll still be able to find an alignment as the sun gets higher to really make something exciting out of this. One thing that makes a really important difference to this scene is a polarizer. So this is actually the waterfall without a polarizer, and then I'm just going to cut to the video with the polarizer on at maximum polarization, and that really brings out the colors in the rainbow. And you can see without it, it doesn't really work. You can barely see the colors at all. With it, they're just starting to come through, and I'm hoping that as the sun changes position, they'll become even more prominent. This video gives you a sense of why you do get a rainbow in the waterfall, because if you imagine a rainbow forming around the shadow of my head, as they normally would in the rain when the sun's out, the rainbow just happens to be in the right position to align with that bow. But I do want the shadow of my head here to get a bit lower, because then the sun is higher and I will get the vertical side of the rainbow running through the vertical main falls there. So just a little bit longer to wait, and hopefully I'll get it at its best. And now it is perfect. Look at all that colour. Got the polarizer on to really bring it out, but the texture in the water. I've actually been playing around with longer exposures, so using the 3-stop and the 6-stop, and I'll show you those images. But actually I think it might be better with the texture of the spray there falling, and so maybe shorter shutter speeds are the way to go in this case.
I photographed Tugela Falls turning into a rainbow like this on many occasions now. In fact, I think I was probably the first person to photograph this optical effect, but it's always a thrill. It just seems so unlikely that this is going to happen, and yet every year with regularity it does. So this year I concentrated on photographing abstracts of that main colourful portion of the main fall. And it was the shorter shutter speeds that seemed to be the most effective, freezing the droplets in motion. This is 1/30th of a second, so I suppose there is a tiny bit of motion blur of the droplets, but it's producing quite intense colours and really nice texture, whereas this 1 second exposure shot with a polarizer and a 3-stop on top is a bit more ethereal, but those colours are blending together a little bit more, and the 3-second exposure even more so, although it does become more abstract, and maybe you'd question exactly what you were looking at if you saw this photograph on its own. So they do have their own qualities, these different exposures, but unfortunately for K's, I can't say that the 3 and 6-stop filters were particularly necessary on this occasion, although a polarizer absolutely is essential. So if there's a technical takeaway from this, it's make sure you have a polarizer if you're photographing rainbows or waterfalls with this kind of effect.
That's the end of this video here at Tugela Falls. If you have enjoyed it, please do leave me a comment below, or like and subscribe to my channel. We've actually got a lot of hiking left in this trip. This is just day 2 of a 7-day trip, and we need to get going actually, because we're expecting rain this afternoon and we've got a lot of miles to cover today. So I'm going to end the video here, but I hope you've enjoyed it.